Good morning, everyone. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and this is the time when we go live with our Canadian Immigration Institute live Q&A. Just as usual, we try to answer as many questions as possible, though we probably unable to answer all of the questions that we receive just because we have limited time, but we do our best. And this is the time when people need help the most, and many of our viewers are stuck. They don't know what they need to do. Sometimes they have very specific questions. Sometimes they have generic questions. They want to see what do we think about what's happening with Canadian immigration. So the purpose of this live Q&A is specifically to address those questions. So while we're waiting for people to pile in, we invite everyone to leave us a comment. Let us know where they tune in from. Perhaps leave your questions in the chat bot, and we'll get to your questions soon. But in the meantime, how are you doing, Alicia? It's been a while since we've done this live Q&A together.
It's true, Igor. It's true. We had a little bit of a. I know you were traveling, and I was camping, and yeah, it was. It's been a beautiful fall. It's been super dry, but the weather's been warm, so we were able to get out and do some backcountry hiking, which was fabulous. So we finally managed to get into one of the lakes that I've always wanted to go to. So that was really great. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we do have a couple of messages already popping up in the chat. So we'll give a shout out to a few people. So Callie says hello from Jamaica. Hello to you, Callie, as well. Zeus says hello, Igor. Hi, Alicia. We just had a Expert Entry Masterclass yesterday, and Zeus had a bunch of good questions. So hello to you, Zeus, as well. And then people are just posting their questions, and I propose that without any further ado, we'll dive right in. On this note, Zeus also says that the CEC draw just happened, and you're absolutely right. So let me share my screen. I think you should be able to see it now. Let me just change it to my Safari. Okay, that looks better. And by the way, this is our website, so if you ever need individualized support or you have a very key specific question, we would direct you to our website where you can book a consult. But let's go to the RSSC rounds of invitations page. And Zeus, you're absolutely right. There is a new CEC draw that happened just minutes ago, essentially, because I'm subscribed to this notification system that lets me know when there is a draw. And as we were going live, I just got a notification that it just happened, like literally within minutes before we went live. So, Alicia, what do you think about this CC draw?
Yeah, so it's been holding steady at 534. That seems to be the magic number. So if we look back in a few of the past CEC draws going back into beginning of September, and I think even the previous one to that, it's all been 534. So that's kind of the magic CRS score that people need to get if they're looking at a CEC. Um, it's super high, right? I know I've had a number of consults, especially these days. I'm getting a lot of consults with Americans who are looking at their options, whether they might be able to move to Canada. And sometimes there are work permit options, especially for Americans, because so far we still have the Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreement. And so people who are professionals might be able to find job offers and be able to work through a IMP program, so the International Mobility Program. You can have an employer file that employer portal offer, people can come and work, and that might be enough to be able to get your foot in the door and then to try to get your Canadian work experience. But it's really hard if you are outside of Canada and you're over the age of 30 and you don't have a master's and you don't speak French. It is really, really tough to be able to try to hit anywhere near that 534. So it is a super high CRS score for sure. It was a small draw, right? So there's only 1,000 ITAs that went out. And this is where that tie-breaking rule becomes really important. And I don't know, maybe Igor, you can click on the draw and just take a look and see what the tiebreaker was February 21st, 2025. And so this means that it really matters now how long ago you had a valid profile. Because what's happening is when they're doing that 534 draw, they will take a look and they will invite everybody at exactly 534. And if there are too many people who have exactly 534, then they're going to implement this tiebreaker rule. And that means that if your profile was created after February 21st, 2025, then you lose out. So some people might be saying, well, wait a minute, I have a CRS of 534. Why am I not getting an invitation? Well, maybe you just recently created your Express Entry profile. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is where it really does pay to have that valid profile, make sure that it's a valid profile, make sure you're properly claiming your work experience. I don't know about you, Igor, but I've had a number of consults where people thought that they were good and maybe they've received a PNP notification of interest. And then I go and take a look at their Express Entry profile, and there's a number of errors in there in terms of what they had calculated, or maybe they were using the wrong test score. There's been circumstances where people used an IELTS one skill retake, and those are not valid for Express Entry. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
to be, there's just so many things that you have to watch out for.
Yeah. And Alicia, on this note, I wanted to pull up a comment from Michiko, who says hello from Toronto. Hello to you. He raises a really good point. So the past CSC draws have been consistent at 534, and this is actually true. And oh my God, this is very interesting observation. So look at this. They've issued 1,000 nominations, and the cutoff was 534. Then September 3rd, 1,000 nominations exactly, and exactly the same score. Look back, 1,000 nominations in August with exactly the same score. Like,
Mhm.
this is quite bizarre. Um,
Mhm.
it's very interesting to see how it so happens that exactly 1,000 people would fall back to the same score.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have any insights why this might be happening?
Well, it is unusual, right? We haven't actually seen, if you look back historically and you can screen by the category of draw, most of the CRS scores bounce around quite a bit. And so it's interesting that it keeps being exactly 534. I think it's relatively coincidental, but also that score is not coming down because the draws are so small, right? They're only picking 1,000 people at a time. And even though we had a PNP draw, those are just scooping up the people who have the extra 600 points on the PNP nomination. And those have been super tiny as well, right? Just a few hundred people at a time. So there
Right.
hasn't been a really big scoop to kind of draw down the overall CRS score.
Yeah. I think when I have a little more free time, I'll play around with the calculator to see why exactly people fall at this threshold, like 534. Like, what skill set you need to have to get that many points, because it looks like there is a bottleneck, right? Like, not many people can go above 534, and that's why like they keep drawing 534 candidates only. All right, so we do have a comment from Spidey, our faithful follower, saying hello, looking the magnificent point Champlain, wondering when can I call this place my real home. We don't know. We don't know. Hopefully soon. Let's see. Indie Gothic Society says, good morning, everyone. Let's see, did anyone else say hello, or just we have the questions? It looks like we only have questions in the chat. So without any further ado, let's go in and we'll pull up the question from Alvin. Alvin says, currently working as an early childhood educator in Manila. Is the completion of an early childhood education certificate program or post-secondary courses in ECE necessary, as my career has been mostly in sales and marketing? Great question. Very good
Mhm.
question.
And this is becoming more and more important when people are looking at category-based draws and you're trying to get in under one of like the educator category. We know there was an educator draw, education draw a few weeks ago. So there are differences, Alvin, between federal skilled worker, work experience, foreign work experience, and Canadian CEC high skilled work experience. And so Yeah, there is a little bit of language about whether you are eligible to complete the job. And early childhood educators, if you go to the NOC, so Igor has pulled open the National Occupation Classification Code for early childhood educators. And if you go to the bottom, you'll see that there are employment requirements. So completion of a 2 to 4 year program in early childhood education or a bachelor's degree in early childhood development is required. And then licensing is required in different provinces if you're looking at Canadian requirements. And many of those are mandatory regulated. So you'll have to take a look. If, of course, you were in Canada, you'd have to look and make sure that you're mandatory regulated. If you're outside of Canada, the issue becomes, can you validly claim foreign work experience if you don't actually have the necessary credentials? And so it becomes an argument of, okay, what have you done for your education? And have you taken a certificate course after your degree, right? So if your career has been in sales and marketing and you don't have a related degree, did you do something else that would have qualified you to work as an early childhood educator in the Philippines? So that's really the question. And when you ask your employer for a letter of reference, are they going to say you're actually doing the lead statements? So if you scroll up on this page, Igor, we know that IRCC, when they look at your NOC and the NOC you've chosen, they're going to analyze that first paragraph. We call that the lead statement. So are you doing the activities of the lead statement? Are you doing the essence of the job? And then not only the activities of the lead statement in the opening paragraph, but if you scroll down to the job duties, you can take a look and it's broken down under early childhood educator. And maybe Igor, if you scroll a little bit lower on this NOC page, you'll see that there are two kind of subcategories: early childhood educator assistants and then early childhood educators. You don't have to do both, so keep in mind it falls within the same NOC. And so maybe if you don't have the certification, if you don't have the mandatory education for an early childhood educator, maybe you might be claiming a early childhood educator assistant role instead. So if that's the case, then you would take a look at the job duties, the specific job duties within the early childhood educator assistant bullets, and you want to be showing that you're meeting the majority, we say, of those. So the substantial number, and we say to be safe, take about 75%, make sure that you're hitting about 75% of the mandatory ones, so that you can notice that last bullet point starts with the word may. That's not a mandatory bullet point. So the ones that don't start with the word may, you've got to be doing 75% of them. So Alvin, to answer your question, if you've not completed the required courses, it really depends on what your employer is going to say the essence of the job is, what their letter of support is going to say. But if you do not have the mandatory kind of background for this, you might be able to look at an early childhood educator assistant, but you and your employer have to be on board and you've got to prove the lead statement, activities of the lead statement, and the majority of the bullet pointed duties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we have some very good questions. So as you were answering this one, I was just scanning through the chat. Javed also says hello from Chicago. Is this live? Yes, it is live. Frenchify says hi, nice to see you guys. Great nickname. Very, very timely, I would say. Without French, it's very hard to see a clear immigration pathway right now. CE user says, nice to see and hear Alicia. Yes, we missed Alicia as she was away for a couple of weeks. Let's see, we do have more questions piling up, so let's not keep people waiting. So we'll move on to the next one from Khan. Hi, Igor and Alicia. I ordered GCMS notes 2.5 months ago, but still haven't received it. Is this normal? It is. It is. Unfortunately, and Alicia, it's all over the place. Like I've seen some GCMS notes arrive like in a month, and then some people are waiting like for 3 months, for 6 months. Sometimes GCMS notes would not arrive for a year, and like it just it's a hit and miss. Like you never know. Did you have any clients recently, Alicia, who ordered GCMS notes? Like, what was their timelines?
I haven't had anybody share what their recent timelines were on GCMS notes. I do know just like Igor said, it really depends on how you request the GCMS notes. And so if you say anything where it seems like you're asking for something where they really have to delve into the file, something other than what's easily accessible on kind of the electronic first stage application, then like if they have to redact things for family members, if they have to redact things for children or associated spouses or things like that, it will take longer. So if you're a single applicant and you're asking for just, the straight computer notes, that tends to be the fastest turnaround time.
Yeah, and I remember that 2 years ago we attended a conference in Montreal, and they were so bragging about their new portal where you would see the GCMS nodes right there on the spot. 2 years later, we still don't have that portal. It's still nowhere in the progress. Like we don't know anything about it. It looks like all of a sudden our government has a brilliant idea, and then they start executing it, and then we have another brilliant idea. Let's abandon this old one. And unfortunately, I don't see a solution to it because so many people get refusals right now. So many people have their applications stuck in processing for years, and they all want to know what's happening. Um, I have a ton of clients right now who reach out about potential mandamus applications, and they said, I've requested 5 GCMS notes. I do it like every month, and I get my GCMS notes like with 3 months delay, and I'm so done with it. I reached out to my member of parliament, and so people actually reach out to MPs right now, trying to expedite everything. And what it does, it creates this strain on the system, and instead of like processing applications, instead of focusing on something more important, the officers are just like trying to keep up. It's like whacking them all, right? You provide response to one GCMS request, and then all of a sudden you have another one from the same person. So yeah, it's hard, and it's really heartbreaking that people find themselves in this situation where they're like in complete unknown for years. All right. Nash raises another problem that we're dealing with right now: Canada Post strikes. And Nash has not yet received his PR card. He recommends that the government uses private companies like FedEx. Do you see that happening, Alicia?
Not historically, but we've got kind of things have come to a head with Canada Post, and basically they're worried that the company is pretty much insolvent, right? And there's been a number of things that have led to this point, but this is where we're at now. And so, yes, historically, the government of Canada has always used Canada Post for all sorts of things. So for PR cards, for social insurance kind of benefits, for health benefits, pension things. There are a number of reasons why people are pretty worried right now about delays with Canada Post and getting things in the mail. I don't know if they will switch over to a different provider. It kind of remains to be seen. But yeah, Nash, we hear your frustration.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just trying to select the questions for the queue. Okay. Right. So the next one is from KHE. Hi. In tech pathway application, so I understand Alberta accelerated tech pathway application, do we need to show all the work experience even though I didn't show it in expert entry profile, or should we show work experience when I was a student studying in Canada?
Yeah. So KG, the Alberta AAIP application portal is a bit of a pain. You
Mm-hmm.
have to follow it exactly. Exactly. And so it's a problem because you have a federal express entry profile. You have to meet all the requirements for the federal program. And then in addition to that, you've got to meet all the requirements for Alberta Accelerated Tech Express Entry Pathway as a subset within Alberta. And so even though they didn't ask you for some of these things in your federal express entry profile, if you get your notification of interest, and now you're actually at the application stage where you're filing your AAIP application, then yes, you've got to go through each of those fields. You've got like the whole alphabet there that you've got to answer. And be really specific. So read every single question it's going to ask you for the relevant period of time. Some of those questions are going to be framed differently. Take a look at the Alberta document checklist really, really carefully, because they ask for things that you're not required to provide at the federal level, like your high school documents and periods of time. So there's all sorts of things where you just have to be very, very detailed oriented where you're going through that AAIP notification of interest application.
Yeah. And Alicia, on this note, I will just pull up this screenshot from the AAP application. This is section B, and this is what they say. Enter the work history for each of your employers you have worked for in the past 30 months, starting with the position you held before your current position. And when you do it, it would prompt you to provide like the reference letters and stuff, right? Um, Actually,
Yeah,
yeah, like
but
it's just bizarre. Like, why would you claim work experience that you don't claim points for?
it is important, Igor, because then if take a look at the next section, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it's only if you're applying as a grad of an Alberta post-secondary institution with a PGWP, then you're only going to do the work experience that you've worked in the last 18 months, starting with your current position, starting with the position before your current position, because you've already put your current position in a different field. So KG, I don't, it seems like you were studying in Canada. I don't know if you're studying in Alberta. I don't know if you've got a PGWP and you're eligible for this exemption. But if you're not, then you've got to go through the past full 30 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, PNP is not great, unfortunately. Um, all right, let's go back to the questions. Next one would be from Ahmed. I'm inside Canada now. If I can manage a teaching job outside Canada, I mean remote teaching job actually, am I eligible for category-based education draw? Yes, your remote work experience for non-Canadian employer would qualify for foreign work experience, but then it really comes down to what makes sense. Like, does it pass the smell test, right? Like, if you have prior experience as a teacher, then okay, it's positive. But then, how can you teach online, right? Like, it really depends on the nature of your job, right?
Yeah. And Ahmed, there's a number of moving factors here.
Mm-hmm.
So Igor and I are both immigration lawyers. We would recommend that you reach out, go to the Holthe Law Immigration website. So
Mm-hmm.
if you take a look, you can go and book a consultation and you can talk with one of us directly. We can give you one-on-one advice. If you go and click book a consult, and I think somebody else was also asking, how do I
Mm-hmm.
book a consult? This is how you
Right.
book a consult. So this live stream is for immigration information. We are trying to do our best to spread high quality information, but we cannot give you individualized legal advice. So please reach out, book a consult. That's where we can talk with you. You'll upload your documents. There's an intake form where you can tell us exactly what's going on your file, and we're going to sit down and go through it in detail with you in either 25 minutes or 50 minutes, depending on what you book. When we're looking at claiming foreign work experience while you're physically in Canada, there are some trade offs, right? It depends on what your status is here in Canada. How long is your work permit valid? Are you maximizing 1 year of Canadian high skilled work experience? Normally, you cannot claim more than 30 hours of work in any given week. And so then you might be sacrificing your 2nd year of Canadian work experience if you've already hit your 1st year. Um, you got to take a look at status. You've got to take a look at how is that affecting your points, and then also how are you putting that in your express entry profile, because there are a number of pitfalls if immigration thinks, oh, maybe you're physically somewhere outside of Canada, and then that's going to trigger a police certificate request. You have a duty to be honest in terms of your residential addresses. You've got to make it really clear if it is remote work, and just like Igor said, how are you legitimately doing a full-time job or even a part-time job outside of Canada? Are you hitting all the essential duties of a teacher if you don't actively have students in front of you?
Right.
So please book a consult. We can chat about your options.
Yeah, but technically, the remote work that you do for a non-Canadian employer remotely counts as foreign work experience. But again, as we've mentioned, right, like even though that's the thing, you cannot claim remote work experience as a carpenter, right? Because like it just doesn't make sense, right? It's not possible. So if your job requires that you teach children, but do you have like a talking head, mounted on the robot, and just cruising around the classroom, or you do that online? Like, it really depends on the nature of your job. So absolutely, before we can answer that question with certainty, we need to know a little bit more about the actual job that you will be doing. And I think this advice to book a consult goes for the next viewer as well. Wife to leave Canada, return as a visitor because I intend canceling her work permit. Is this enough to demonstrate that she's not accompanying? It doesn't pass the smell test right now. It does sound really sketchy. So probably we need to know a little bit more about your situation, and we recommend that you don't cancel anything until you speak to someone and get a personalized advice. Do you have any other comments on this, Alicia?
I would be ringing the triangle.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need to know more about what's going on in that situation. Some people try to be really cute about their spouse non-accompanying. Generally, if your spouse is physically present in Canada, immigration's going to say it's misrep. If you try to say that they're non-accompanying, whether they have a work permit or not, if they're physically present in Canada, then I'm pretty sure immigration's going to say it's misrep to try to submit an express entry profile with a non-accompanying spouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's move on. Wow, I cannot keep up with the questions. Like, we have so many. We have like 47 comments already. All right. Gemini 2212. I'm not sure if Gemini stands for the name or the AI tool that Google uses and what the digits stand for, but whatever. Hello, Igor and Alicia. Does working remotely as an independent contractor for a Canadian employer while physically outside Canada count as foreign work experience? Wages paid in home country bank. On the surface, it does, but it really depends on the specifics again, right? And I hate to say it, but like, people always have this perception of lawyers, like, unless you pay them, they will not tell you anything. They always say it really depends. It depends. That's like lawyers' favorite quote, but there is a reason why, right?
Yeah, Gemini, we'd need to know way more about this situation. So it is possible that you can claim foreign work experience while you're working for a Canadian employer physically outside of Canada. You're claiming the right knock, you've got your pay stubs, you've got your job duties, you've got everything from the employer to prove your employment. But there are a number of pitfalls when you're working for a Canadian employer outside of Canada. You've got to show, was it authorized work? What's the tax situation sometimes? What sort of proof are you going to be providing IRCC? And then as you put that into your express entry profile, again, really important to do it correctly because there's a number of ways that it can be misinterpreted in terms of where you physically are and how that relates to requirements for police certificates, and also just an obligation to be honest about what you're doing with your time. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, this viewer also has a question. Given education categories part of BC PNP, Ontario HCP, Alberta PNP, and there's a $10 a day childcare center policy. Could education and early childhood educators continue in 2026 categories? What do you think? It's very very interesting question. Let's see. Maybe I'll share my
Yeah,
while you're
Dr.
answering this.
Um, I think Mark and I are a little bit less optimistic about the education category remaining. We literally only had two draws. So up until a week ago, we only had the one draw. Now we have had two draws. Um, maybe they will keep it and just not do draws under it. Um, it remains to be seen. So next year they will tell us what the new categories are, or if they're keeping categories. They did have a consultation, and so I know I filled out a survey about the category-based draws, and they have been receiving feedback from a number of stakeholders across the country about category-based draws. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But personally, I'm not super optimistic about it. I don't know what you think, Igor.
Yeah, I'm actually quite surprised that we even have this category. Like, we don't have a baby boom in Canada. Um, the number of international students, like, at least does not increase dramatically in the last couple of years. Schools are closing, people are leaving. All of those who used to teach would be out of jobs. Campuses will be closing. At least, like, again, I tend to be a little more pessimistic than everyone else in the firm. So I have no idea, like, why do we even have this category? And if it's so in demand, why do we only have two draws this year? Um, I don't have question. I don't have answers to this question. So,
Yeah, I know people are worried about the impending teacher strike in Alberta. So
mhm,
yeah, we'll
yeah,
see.
yeah. My wife said at her job, the company said, you can take a paid leave of absence or like a sick day to stay with your kid while the teachers are on strike. And like, what if you don't have any left? Like, what do you do? And why teachers are on strike if we have this category and teachers are so in demand? Like, too many questions, not so many answers, unfortunately. Ruel says that he noticed in some Facebook groups, that Alberta PNP approves applications in less than a month for some cases. But when I looked at the AIP website, it says they're assessing applications in June 2025. Uh, they can approve something in a month if there's a miracle, and miracles happen. I had an HNC client who got her application approved in 30 days, while others waiting like for 2 or 3 years or sometimes longer. So things happen in unique situations. Maybe it's possible, but indeed they take 6, 7, 8 months to process an application. My clients just recently got their nomination, and we submitted it back in probably April last year. So
Yeah. Yeah.
takes
So
time.
I guess, Igor, the other thing we can mention is that Alberta did get a little bump up in their
Mm-hmm.
nominations. And so if you take a look at the AAIP website, you'll see there was that update on September 9th. And so, about 1,500 additional nomination allocations for this year, which is good, because otherwise I don't know if there would have been so many small draws, right? So we've had a number of small draws. So people have been noticing a little bit of movement. There have been a number of tiny draws kind of back to back. If you take a look at the processing updates for Alberta, you can kind of see what's been happening. September 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th, 16th, 17th. We've had a number of new little notifications of interest. To answer your question too, Ruel, I'm sure you're taking a look at the website, and you can kind of see it breaks it down by entrepreneur stream, Alberta Express Entry stream, AOS. What are the applications that they're currently processing? And so some of those people on Facebook may have gone through the dedicated healthcare pathway, because if you take a look at that, well, they're assessing applications received on August 29th, right? That one, that's a popular one. We need our healthcare professionals, and they are Johnny on the spot on those ones. But if you take a look at like rural renewal, some of those are not being processed since April of 2024. Um, AOS is June of 2025. So it really depends on which category people submitted their application under, which one did they get a notification of interest under. And the other thing that I've been noticing as well recently is that because there have been a number of back-to-back draws, sometimes people actually got a notification of interest under AOS when they really wanted an express entry linked application. And because your profile is locked, if you get a notification of interest, you've got 15 days to go in and decide whether you're going to accept it or reject it. If there's another draw right away, you're not able to accept that next draw, right? You're not eligible for that next draw. And some people are not actually eligible for AOS, but it pulled their profile anyways. And so you got to be super careful. I've had a few consults where people got the AOS draw. We had a consult. I said, no, you're not eligible. They withdrew their profile. They actually rejected the notification of interest, went back into the pool, and right away they managed to get an express entry linked draw. So yeah, be careful about what you're looking at when you get your notification of interest, because even though they give you a notification of interest, there's no guarantee that you're eligible for that category. So the onus is on you to check.
Yeah, like just recently in a master class, yesterday actually, I don't remember, was it Zeus or someone else, who asked a question for his friend. Like he got a AOS invitation, and he is a holder of a postgrad work permit, and so he
Mm-hmm.
must meet this education requirement. So he needs to complete his education
Mm-hmm.
in Alberta, and so he's like, how would he get a nomination, like an invitation? I mean, what should he
Yeah,
do with it? Like he qualifies for tech draw, but like, can he proceed with
he
it?
should refuse it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, I'm not saying he should without knowing more about the situation, but in general, if you are not eligible and you get a notification of interest, so it's tricky because we have to be clear on our language. So if you put in a profile, a worker EOI profile, you get a notification of interest under AOS, but you know you're not eligible because, for example, on a PGWP, you have to have completed relevant education and your work has to be relevant to the degree that you did. And if that's not the case, and you know you're not going to be eligible, your best option might be to decline that notification of interest right away as soon as you can so that you can go back into the pool. And then if there's an express entry link draw, and that's the one you were trying to hope to get, you could be eligible for it. So there is a bunch of strategy about this, and the government doesn't care. They say it's not their problem. It's up to you to figure out whether you're eligible.
yeah. And on this note, I just want to play the sound. It's the sound that shows that robots are not as sophisticated as humans, because when you enter your work permit information, you put this W number of your work permit. The system doesn't know if it's a postgrad or it's an open work permit or a closed work permit. It may give you a nomination, an invitation, even if you're not eligible. And like so many people think, oh, if I got something from the government, they checked everything, they know I'm eligible. No, and we see that happen all the time. Actually, one of my client, Alicia, it's so bizarre. Um, she has work experience in teaching, um, somewhere outside of Canada, or actually no, I think she has a teaching experience in Canada, but it's not continuous, and it like the system rounds up her experience to 6 months, and with every education draw, she receives an ITA. And she's like, I'm so happy I got an ITA. And then we go in and look, and we're like calculating the hours, and it's impossible to proceed with this application. And every time there is an education draw, she takes one of those spots that never proceeds anywhere. And I'm like, come on, guys, can't you just modify your system tiny bit, just so that you don't just mention the months but the actual date? Apparently, no. Apparently, that's something that the government cannot do for now. Okay. On this note, let's move on to the next question from Frenchify. Frenchify says, I am a single applicant who got permanent residence. Okay. I have not made my first landing yet. Should I get married after my first landing to avoid complications, or so that I can sponsor my wife for a spousal visa? Oh, ugh, yeah.
So this is a bell. This is
It is.
definitely a bell. Okay, so Frenchify, there's a number of moving parts, right? So you always have to make sure that you are being honest. You can't have misrepresentation. If you've been in a relationship with somebody for a long period of time, the risk is always, will immigration think that you are a common law partner, right? So were you living with this person continuously for 1 year prior to the date that you submitted your express entry EAPR? And if the answer is yes, then it could be that you ought to have disclosed this person and already included them as a spouse, even if you're not legally married. So it really depends. Do you meet that definition under Canadian law of a common law partner? Were there prior applications where you ought to have disclosed this person? Like, have you been here on a PGWP or a work permit? Have they been here on some sort of temporary status as well? Did you have to disclose that relationship in the past? Will IRCC be suspicious if all of a sudden, you get married to somebody and they weren't disclosed in the past? Let's say you guys have not been together for a year and you are looking at getting married. There are ways to try to add a spouse prior to landing if it's a marriage that happens and you've not yet married, but that can affect your application. And so that spouse is going to have to be examined, right? So you'll have to see if they are admissible to Canada. And also, it's kind of like submitting a mini spousal application where you look at the bona fides of the relationship. Are they getting married simply for immigration purposes? Because there's going to be, a suspicion from IRCC that, hey, they're just using you to get status. If you're looking at landing, becoming a PR, and then turning around and sponsoring this person, same thing. You've got to make sure you meet eligibility as a sponsor. They've got to have admissibility as the person being sponsored, and IRCC is going to want to understand more about how that relationship developed. So please book a consult. We can talk through what your options are.
Yeah, and Alicia, while you were answering this question, I've prepared something that I think I'll save as a overlay. Well, it depends. This is going to be our favorite overlay for the next little while because it really depends, and we don't know exactly how to answer your question unless we know the details. So here you have it. I'm just going to save it here so that we don't lose it for future. Oops, sorry. Okay, I think I have it here. Well, it depends. Good. Okay. So let me just make it invisible. Okay, let's move on. T is asking question, what will be the new policies that might be coming for USA H-1B holders? Ooh, very
Yeah, we've
political.
heard. Yeah, we've heard what's going on south of the border with H-1Bs. And I know there's been some news bites in Canada, and Canada was maybe trying to welcome some of the people that now have to pay $100,000 in the US if they're looking at possibly getting an H-1B. So far, there are no announcements from the federal government about any sort of similar H-1B Canadian work permit option. I think it's relatively unlikely that that will happen given the fact that we are trying to reduce our number of temporary residents. We're trying to reduce the number of work permits. But I guess it depends on the politics. It depends on if there is enough industry backing to say, yes, we have jobs for high skilled tech applicants, and also what's going on with the unemployment rate. So,
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. So the next question is from Alvin. Is it possible to provide a certificate of employment from foreign work experience, but all the details were there, like job duty, salary, job position, status? The employer unfortunately doesn't want to give a new reference letter. And I think I had a similar question somewhere from Rajat. Submitted my documents with job duties mentioned in enrollment letter. Oh, sounds very similar. But they refused it because it was not part of the experience letter. But it was not the company's policy to provide one. What should I do now? So you can see what happens if you just provide your contract and not a job reference letter. Because remember, it needs to meet all elements. It needs to be signed by your immediate supervisor, include his name, title, the company address, the letterhead, and it also needs to state the exact start and end date. And if you're currently working, it needs to say that. I have not seen in my life a job offer that says your start date was this and your end date was this.
yeah. Yeah, and Rajat, I mean, as soon as you say, what should I do now? That's ringing the bell. Keep in mind that there is a timeline for a judicial review, right? So if you're looking at possibly trying to file a judicial review, you only have a certain number of days from the date that you received the refusal letter, depending on whether it was an in Canada or an outside Canada refusal. If the problem is yours because you just didn't provide what immigration said was necessary, they're going to say it's an incomplete application. So there's, you know, we'd need more information from you, but it's not a very strong application if you didn't put every single element that IRCC requires forward in your application. And so usually when they refuse, they have more concerns about, are you legitimately claiming this knock and this period of work? And if you're not actually showing, well, you might have a contract showing, okay, well, here's my job title, but many contracts also don't have detailed job duties. They don't go into detail about what you actually do. They may not have all the details on your salary and benefits, and sometimes they don't even have, the hours of work or how many hours per week you did work. And you can't usually tell that from a contract. So they might have real concerns about, are you misrepresenting in order to try to inflate your experience or extend your experience for a longer period of time? So there's a lot we would need to talk to you about in terms of what did you put in those initial applications and what sort of evidence do you have to back it up. For both of these questions, Igor, we've got a course, right? And so this is, if you can't afford to hire us and you can't afford to have us go through your application with a fine-tooth comb and sit down and screen share and go through all your documents with you, then we do have a course. And so Mark, and I know Igor has spent so much time on revamping and updating this Express Entry Accelerator and Masterclass course as well. This is a treasure trove of fantastic information, and it goes down through what do you do if you can't get exactly what IRCC is asking from your employer. Sometimes there are ways that you can cobble together a bunch of other pieces of evidence in order to hit most of the essential elements of what you need to prove. But the onus is on you. It's up to you to try to make sure that you're meeting every single aspect of what IRCC wants to prove your job and your work experience.
Exactly. All right. Let me share the screens. Okay. Question from Ramsey. If I choose IELTS as a first language and TCF as my second language, in that order to maximize my CRS score, will I still get an ITA under Francophone category, or is it mandatory to put TCF first? No, you don't need to put TCF first. It just
Yep.
applies the filter. If you have the scores NCLC 7 and above, you're in Francophone category automatically.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be listed as your primary language. Same thing with category-based draws. You don't have to have that knock under a category-based draw as your primary occupation, as long as you have it within that knock, within the last 6 months, within the last 3 years, then you would be eligible if they did a draw under one of the category-based. So nope, if you're hitting that NCLC level 7, either with, you can maximize your points, right? So put English first, put French second, and then you should be eligible as long as you're hitting 7s in all bandwidths.
Right. Nana is asking, can I go home for an emergency after filling out my Portal 1 and Portal 2? We don't use those terms, Portal 1, Portal 2. What I can say is when they ask you to confirm your current location, current country of residence, you need to answer truthfully. You need to be in Canada to finalize the e-Cooper landing process. And then you can return only when you have permanent resident card, or you would need to apply for a PR travel document, and you only become permanent resident once you have the e-Cooper and you sign it, and you download that e-Cooper from your PR portal. So once you download the e-Cooper, then yes, before you get your PR card, you can go, but it's a lot more sketchy if it happens before that.
Yeah, like Nana, reach out and book a consult. We'd need to know more about where you are in your process. Do you have, are you from a visa required country? Are you able to travel? How long is your passport valid? When did you get your notification? How far along are you in your PR landing process? What's going on with your family members? Is there some way that you can, what are your options? We never want to say yes or no. Sometimes things happen and people have to travel, and sometimes there's a way to try to minimize the headache with IRCC. depending on where you're at in the process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's hard to keep up with all the questions, but we're trying. We're trying. So sorry, guys, if we don't pull up your question right away or we skip it. Um, okay, question. I'm currently working as a early childhood educator assistant in India, but I don't have related prior education in this industry. Could this lead to procedural fairness letter refusal after receiving an ITA? And then could the education category continue in 2026? I think we've answered that question. But on the first one, Alicia, probably I'll do this and do this. Well, it depends.
Yeah, you have an obligation to be honest, right? And so be really careful about, you've got to be honest with what your education history is, what your personal history is, what are the requirements for the job. Is your employer going to say, yeah, you're doing the lead statement and all the activities of an early childhood education assistant, or not? Would they say that this is actually a different not category? Right? So are you not falling within that proper not category? And if immigration thinks that you're misrepresenting and you're kind of shoehorning to try to get into a category-based draw, then they could say that that's misrep, and that can have effects in terms of they can take away your PR, or they can pause and say, we're going to not land you, we're going to give you a procedural fairness letter, and then you have to justify what was going on. So yeah, it depends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we got a super chat from Shrug. Working for a Canadian employer in Canada, if I relocate to India and work remotely for the same employer, new contract, would this be counted as foreign work experience? Typically would, right? Um,
Yeah.
but don't treat it as legal advice, right? It's again, it typically would, but whether it would in your situation, we don't know exactly because we don't know the details. Okay, Cynthia is asking, if you study in Alberta and work in Alberta, how many months of work experience do you need to apply for the AIP? Let me pull up the AIP.
All right, so Cynthia, there are a number of subcategories within AAIP. And the problem is you don't apply to a category. So even when you fill out your worker EOI and it asks you, what category do you want to be considered under, they actually kind of disregard that. And so, you can say what your preference is, but it's up to you to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements for any category that you get a notification of interest under. So the requirements are different depending on whether you're looking at Alberta Opportunity Stream or the Express Entry linked Alberta PNP or Rural Renewal or one of the other targeted pathways. But Igor, you've got the general work experience requirements here.
Mm-hmm. But like, if you on a postgrad in Alberta, all you need is 6 months of full-time work experience. But other than that, you typically need 1 year of full-time. Okay, let's see. Who else do we have in here? Harsim Ranjit says, non-express entry file waiting for AUR since December 2024. Work permit expires this month. Employer won't support extension. Would switching to a visitor record or taking leave of absence help maintain status for file? You typically would need to maintain your employment, like with most PNPs, and it it becomes a big problem.
So we're definitely ringing the bell on this one. There's
Mm-hmm.
please, please, please book a consult and we wish that people book consults earlier rather than later, right? Because if something is expiring this month, sometimes it's too late for us to try to help because you've just run out of time. Take a look at my bridging work permit application blog. So there's the bridging closed and the bridging open. It's really unfortunate. Like, I don't know which PNP you were looking at. I don't know if they did an R204C letter, and then it's just your employer will not do the employer portal on that closed work permit, which is really crummy, right? Like if your province actually gave you the R204C letter and you're going to do a bridging closed work permit, but the problem is the employer just won't do the employer portal. Well, that's pretty crummy. And sometimes it's just that the employer doesn't understand that, this is not, yeah, there's employer compliance, but they just basically have to be following employer standards codes. They have to make sure they're putting in the job offer properly. They pay the $230 employer compliance fee, and then you apply for that closed work permit. Sometimes I'm able to, somebody books a consult and then I'm able to talk with the employer and help them understand what's involved, that this is not the same as an LMIA. There's no labor market test on these. It's a totally different type of application. And sometimes, the employer realizes, okay, well, this is a reasonable ask from that employee. I don't know what's going on with your employer. I don't know if you have other options, but just like Igor said, if you fall outside of status, um, that sometimes is going to affect your eligibility for your underlying application for PR, depending on what category you applied under and what province.
Yeah. We're still trying to go through all the questions that piled in. It looks like we won't be able to pull everyone else's question, but if you have something urgent, we try to prioritize super chats. But I still have a whole list of questions to pull up. So let's proceed with Nikesha. To apply for a study permit in Canada, does an applicant need to show proof of funds if the partner is covering all expenses? Yes, you do. Like, the officer needs to know that you have money, and that's one of the requirements for study permits right now.
And the first thing you said, Nikesha, is something that raises alarm bells in my head, is normally you cannot apply for a study permit from inside Canada. So there are very specific circumstances that are exceptions to the main rule, but the main rule is that you have to apply for a study permit from outside Canada. So that's also something that we'd want to talk to you about.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Liza says, what happens if I got my work permit, but I don't work? I don't have someone who can take care of my baby, and the job place is 1 hour away from my home. You maintain your valid immigration status, but you just don't accumulate Canadian work experience. That's what happens. You don't have an obligation to work. Fortunately, we're not in the 13th, 14th century where people were obligated to work for some guy, otherwise they would get slaughtered. That doesn't happen right now. So treat it as your visitor record, essentially.
Yeah, Elisa, I mean, we would want to know more about your situation. Are there options? What's your plan? Because if you're just losing time on that work permit, right? You have a work permit, but you're not actually making use of it. Are you just going to return to a home country in a few months? Or do you have a pathway to PR? Or what are your options? We'd want to work with you to try to figure out what your immigration pathway is. Because otherwise, yeah, you might just be using up that time, and then you'll maybe not have an opportunity to become a PR or to extend that work permit.
Right. Super chat. What's my chances? 480 CRS score for the next trade draw, considering historical for 30s and recent 504. You're absolutely right to add this qualifier, considering that. And again, it really comes down to what's the government plan is. And we don't know the plan. So let's go to expert entry draws, and then let's search for the previous rounds and add a filter trade. Okay. And 2023, 2024, 2024, 2024, and then just one in 2025. When's the next one going to be? If it happens in a month or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe. But then if they drag their feet just like this last time for about a year, then it's very unlikely.
Yeah, and so Foskey, just like you can see from the stats, and just like you said, 505 on a trade draw is really high. That is a very high CRS score. And the reason that it's so high is because, just like Igor said, this is the only one. This is the only one they've done. And there wasn't a huge amount of invitations to apply that went out. It was only 1,250. So because they don't scoop very big, there's not a large draw, those CRS points stay really high. And so if you're looking at trades and you're at a 480, we can try to rub the crystal ball, but I think if they don't do another trade draw until next year, you might run out of time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, let's see. Isabella asks, do we know when the new immigration plan will be released? Sometime in November, right?
Yeah, so it's normally in the fall where they release the levels plans. And so I'm assuming, Isabella, that's what you're referring to. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Last year there was a big change because, the trajectory was like this, and then all of a sudden politics happened, and then it went like kind of this. And so we're basically reducing population growth to net zero or a little bit below.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll have to see if the current government stays the course and kind of sticks with it. They've been pretty darn quiet, Igor. There's been almost no announcements. It's actually been a little bit nice because we didn't have the landscape shifting beneath our feet constantly for the last couple months. But yeah, we'll see what happens when we get those levels plans.
It's interesting because whatever happens in immigration is like on the extreme level of the scale. Like it's either a ton of updates from one single minister like Mark Miller or Sean Fraser, and then we have Rachel Bendayan and Minister Diab, and you don't see them. Like, and it's so funny like to watch the translation, like the live live streams like from the parliament when they ask the minister and she has no clue what's going on. It's like I would not expect anything, to be honest, at least anything positive like in the next couple of months. But yeah, it's like we don't know. What I know is that when the transition binder was released, it included a ton of censored data, and I didn't like that. Like on agencies, processing times, the public doesn't need to know it. Um, Ukrainian family reunification, public doesn't need to know it. Like, and there's so many other things that we don't know, and there's no reason why people should not know it. But that's on a completely different topic. Okay. Next question from Ya. Postgrad work permit was submitted on September 3rd, 2025. Work permit extension letter, this interim extension, expires on March 2nd, 2026. Will adding a job offer and pay stubs via the web form perform some magic so that I receive my approval ASAP? Typically, I would say it works other way around. Like the more stuff you add to your application, the more stuff the officer needs to consider. But this interim work authorization letter, like this extension, it's just a letter that you can present to someone else and say, "Look, I'm eligible to continue working." But then you're eligible to continue working um, until they make a decision on their postgrad.
Okay, so let's untangle this a little bit, yeah. There's a number of things going on.
Right.
So one thing is, are you eligible for a PGWP? And so there's new rules, of course. And so you've got to make sure that you're eligible for the postgrad work permit, your program was correct, you are applying within the right time frame, you didn't have status lapse, you didn't work without authorization, you didn't have a lapse in studies, you didn't study without authorization. Okay, once you filed all that, that will then dictate whether you have maintained or implied status to continue working under 186 sub W. Okay, so that is what gives you the authorization to continue to work until you get a decision on that PGWP, assuming you had a valid study permit. When you applied for your PGWP, everything was in order. You were within your time period, you were within your study permit validity date, you didn't, and you were still a full-time student. If you had a condition, and I have seen this come up and it becomes really tricky. If you had a condition on your study permit that said you were authorized to work off campus under 186 sub V, then hopefully you would have maintained or implied status to continue to work until you get a decision under 186 sub W. That interim letter is garbage. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, so if you meet the requirements of 186 sub W, then you ought to be able to continue working. It doesn't matter if you don't get another interim authorization letter, but you do have to prove to your employer, hey, I can work. There are some FAQs on IRCC's website, so you can show them, hey, I filed my PGWP. When I filed it, I had a valid study permit. I met all the study permit and PGWP requirements, and I meet everything under 186 sub W. I have a valid SIN, and I ought to be able to work. So you can go through all that. They have a few FAQ pages. If you are talking about submitting a job offer and pay stubs because you're looking at trying to support a work permit for a spouse, that's a whole other world of questions. And that's sometimes what people are trying to do. And there's a bunch of complications about who's applying first. Are you applying at the same time? What's your spouse's status? Are you in a tier 1 occupation? Are you in one of the listed tier 2 or tier 3 occupations? And how long is your PGWP going to be valid at the time that your spouse applies? So there's a lot of other stuff going on, but hopefully you're not asking this because you have a spouse, you're just asking for yourself.
Okay. One more. Could the foreign experience 50 combination points continue in 2026? Could RCC remove these points like LMA? They can do whatever they want. Nima says, good morning, I have 58 points in Alberta PNP expression of interest. What are my chances to get an ITA under Alberta Expression 3 Healthcare, not dedicated healthcare pathway? This is so painful, Alicia. Like, those points are like garbage. like people come to me and say, I have whatever 150 points on a 100-point scale, I mean. Can I get a invitation from Alberta? And I say, we don't know, because Alberta, and this is so irritating, like in 2025, they don't share exactly the filters that they apply for each draw. They say, oh, it's
They
just
used to.
Alberta. Yeah, they used to do it in 2024, and you could at least get an idea how they do it and what's behind the scenes. But here, it's like it's you're like in total unknown, and I don't know why would they do it. I don't know why.
Alberta's a black box, right? They're a
Mm,
black box, and they've always been a black box. They kind of just do what they want to do, and they don't want to tell you, and it's up to you to sort it out, and too bad if you don't. That's kind of their attitude. And so Igor is right, Nima. The points don't really matter other than they can bite you if you claimed points that you weren't eligible for, and then they can bar you from the program for 5 years for misrep. So you do have to be really careful in making sure that you're properly claiming those points. The massive headache that I'm having with a number of people booking consults right now are these regulated occupation, professional occupation points for Alberta, right? Alberta lists it differently. There's a bunch of wrinkles about whether you can or cannot claim those professional points or the trade points. So you do have to be careful in terms of what you're claiming, but whether you have a good chance at 58 or 62 or 67, it really depends on the constellation of factors that they are pulling, like the filters that Igor said, to do a notification of interest round. And because they don't keep that public, it is really hard to tell. We do know that factors that are beneficial are having an employer, so a job offer from an Alberta employer, having worked and lived in Alberta for at least 6 months, having gone to school in a valid post-secondary education institute in Alberta, or having an Alberta family member. Those are things that they generally look upon positively.
yeah. And Alicia, on this note, I just cannot help but pull up this page again. So this is what we know. Alberta Express Entry Stream or Alberta Opportunity Stream. Okay, let's talk about this one, okay? So 63 points, that's all you need. They've issued 1,100 nominations, and that's all that we know. Now let's look back to 2024. Let's see how things were done that way back then, right? So you have the draw parameters, right? And then they provided a breakdown of the filters that they applied for each draw. My favorite one is this one, November 27. Okay, so right now all you would know is that they had an AUS draw, but then if you look into the details, then you see additional filters that they don't show right now on their website. You must have a postgrad work permit. So all co-ed work permit holders, all open work permit holders, spousal open work permit holders, they're not eligible. So they are done. Like they don't have a shot, even though this is an AOS stream. And right now, when they say, "Oh, it's an AOS stream," that's just the tip of an iceberg. Like you don't see what's below the water level, right? Work permit expiry, completed education in Alberta, work experience, blah blah blah, and then look at this NOC that starts with 1 or 6. Like they can add as many filters as they want. So your points are just one tiny element in this calculation. So they don't really mean anything right now. Okay, we do have a super chat from Amor. What is the procedure for an employer to extend the work permit for an AUS admin assistant position? Is this currently under a closed work permit?
Okay, Amor, take a look at our business immigration series. And so Mark and I have done a podcast, Canadian Immigration Podcast, and we talk all about when an employer needs to file an LMIA versus when you might be able to file a employer-specific work permit, so a closed work permit under the IMP, the International Mobility Program. Just because you've applied under AOS, there's no easy way for you to get a work permit. It is only if you actually have submitted a PR application, so completed permanent resident portal application. So that means you had a worker expression of interest, you got a notification of interest under AOS, you submitted an application, you got a positive nomination from Alberta under AOS, and then you submitted a federal PR portal application, and you got your acknowledgement of receipt. If all that happened and you have a R204C letter to support a bridging closed work permit, then your employer might be able to do an application under the employer portal under that bridging closed work permit to support a bridging closed work permit. So you could also take a look at the article that Igor had pulled up a little bit earlier on our website where I wrote on our blog about the differences between a bridging closed and a bridging open work permit. But if you are looking at an employer-sponsored nomination, notification of interest, and they gave you that R204C letter, and you actually have a nomination. So in that article, maybe Igor, you can scroll down and I actually show, what the nomination certificate looks like. And so this is where it's really important to take a look at your nomination certificate to try to figure out if employment is or is not restricted. And only if you've actually filed a complete permanent residence application under the PR portal could you be possibly eligible for that bridging, but then you need your employer on side and they have to do that employer portal piece as well. So just because you have an AOS expression of interest does not, you only have AOS and CEC application, but not invited. Yeah, so there's nothing that changes the normal rules. Your employer then just has normal rules. They either have to get an LMIA or you have to be eligible for some other IMP category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alicia, two more questions. I'm not going to be pulling up any other questions, but Zeus is asking, what's version 1 and version 2 in ITA draw types? This is when they announced different categories and they had different list of eligible knockcodes that belongs to a category. For example, agriculture, they used to have a bunch of knockcodes. Now they have just butchers in there. So version 1 would be where they had a ton of different knockcodes under the category. Version 2 is just with one occupation. So different versions of the same categories. For example, STEM, right? They used to have tech occupations, now they don't. So they should rename it to SAM, but they don't. And so many questions. Okay. Joe is saying, I've been working as a graphic designer for the past 10 years. I just got promoted as an advertising manager. Will it help my express entry application in any way? Likely not, because both occupations would typically be a skilled occupation, and you just continue on with another skilled occupation. Um, so, any other ideas, Alicia, how this might be helpful for Joe?
Yeah, Joe. So I mean, you can definitely reach out. We can talk with you and see if there's anything else that you're missing, right? Like, what else do you have in your Express Entry profile? Are you maximizing your foreign work experience points? Is there a way that you can try to get some foreign work experience for 6 months in a category? Even if you're going to sacrifice your third or fourth year of Canadian work experience, sometimes that's worth it to be eligible for a category-based draw, but it might not be possible depending on your background and experience, especially if you're been promoted to an advertising manager, you don't necessarily want to sacrifice that. So often the conversation becomes, can you learn French? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going on if you have a spouse? Are there things to maximize your spouse's points as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amor says that she will be booking a consult with you. I understand with you, Alicia. So absolutely, just go to our website, holthelaw.com, or you can click the link in the description, and then click Speak to a Lawyer and select the duration of the consult. And finally, before we wrap up, um, B plus V. This is a perfect scenario for me clicking this triangle button and directing you to book a consult as well. What is better? What should I do in my situation? All of those type of questions. We can give you advice during this live Q&A. We can give you information. So before you make a decision, please have someone that you speak to and who can tell you what you should be doing and what are the considerations. For everyone else, if you need any help, click the links in the description to book a consult or check out one of our courses that helps you navigate the process on your own. And we'll be back next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And thank you, everyone, for sending your wonderful questions. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Igor.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.